Hello and welcome to the Being and Becoming podcast. My name is Logan Hauer. I'm joined today by Austin Stone and Patrick Dyer, my two regular hosts. Today we're going to shoot the breeze, so we had quite a extensive talk before the recording. Pat, I wanted you to start this conversation off with a thought.
I was just going to say, some reason just feel inclined to think that Adam and Eve kind of built their family before the fall. Some reason. I don't have something strong to go off of, but
I don't have anything strong to go off of either, but I've wondered that as well, Pat. If their childbearing was at some point painless and they had kids, but then once the fall happens, they have maybe more kids, and that's when it does become painful or laborious.
But the reason it's so difficult to decide is there's no time frame we're given, and there's also no reason to think that time, the way we understand it now, is even occurring before the fall.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Postmodern, go ahead and just spin our heads.
Well,
no,
I mean, there's no reason for death, right? But that's also not to say that there wasn't death. Not humans dying, but there's still the earth was created. There's still cycles of seasons. There's plants have to die in order to grow again, to fertilize the soil. I mean, there's and the animal kingdom, there was still, especially if you believe in new earth creation, unless there was complete divine intervention, there was no way there was not carnivores pre-fall. In other words, there were carnivores. There were still animals eating animals.
I don't think there was. Well, because when the lion lays down with the lamb in new creation.
And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying, because think now, if the earth is only 6,000 years old, there's still wolves with super sharp teeth. There's no way their teeth could have changed from molars to canine.
So you're saying, why would there be a creature designed to eat other creatures?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Well, guys, I really like the conversation we're going down, but I do want to frame it for the listener.
Oh, true.
So we're starting to get into some origin theories, which I think is a natural lead in from where we were previously talking about with the fall creation. I think that's a natural conversation to have to lead out of. And it's something I think we've all talked about quite extensively off of the podcast. Definitely something I'm personally interested in. And Pat, you had mentioned new earth creation. So just framing this for the listener at home, we have evolutionary theory, we have creationism, there's probably a handful of other theories as well, but for the point of our conversation, those are different theories that a majority of people, I would say, believe in evolution, a subsect believe in creation, and then within creationism, there's, or I guess so another theory, or maybe it ties into creationism, is intelligent design as well. So, but within creationism, you have the old earth, new earth creationist beliefs, and the new earth creationist would believe the earth is as old as the earliest traces of humanity or the Bible. So the earth in total is 6,000 years old. Time begins when recorded history begins. And then old earth would be, I think, harder to define, but the way I would think about it, and I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this, is that the old earth creationist or creationism belief is that the world is older than recorded history, but you had mentioned, Pat, time was not being kept or measured in the same way, or maybe even the earth, the composition was a little bit different, so time could have been moving faster or slower. Yeah, and then some more of the evolutionary, and evolution has a whole big thing around it too, so maybe I won't get in that rabbit hole right now. So where do you guys think, is that a fair characterization of the old earth creationist belief or idea?
I think so.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Yeah, okay. Or do you have any thoughts on those theories? We were starting to get down that
Plenty of
your
thoughts.
ideas on those, but I just wanted to
Plenty.
frame it for the listener.
Can I start and then hear Patrick's response to my craziness? So I don't have that much interest in learning more about this. It's not like something I'm loving to learn more about, but I just wanted to point out, we'll talk about evolution first. Evolution is probably like the majority theory right now. But do we realize that this majority theory has been around for so little time in recorded history? People have not believed in evolution for 90% of what we know to be recorded human history. Like I just think it's a prideful belief. I think it has branched off from enlightenment in this belief that reason is more important than a belief in a created order. And now humans are the ones that are top dog, and we're all there is. And we don't have a creator. Now there's no God. Now evolution is trying to explain the world without a creator. And now Christians are trying to be cool with evolutionists and trying to integrate evolution into their creationist theory. And I just have no interest in that. But I'm not someone who's that interested in science. So that's not fair to people who want to learn more about how things are created and how evolutionary theory does work for explaining some of those things. So I'm not trying to be ignorant, but I do really have not that much of an interest in trying to integrate evolutionary theory into my beliefs in a young Earth.
And that's fair. I do want to say that there are only so many things we can be interested in, and I would say this is something I am more interested in probably than most people, but I also don't think, to your point, Austin, we can't know with exact certainty about how the earth was formed and etc. But I think the account in Genesis, I still believe, is compelling because it's not a scientific account, obviously. Like the people that were writing that.
Don't be so sure.
Yeah, what is a scientific account?
So that's fair.
Sorry.
I'm glad you said that. No. I think that's a good point. I think that the Genesis is trying to outlay what happened. It's not saying these molecules came together to form which is what I would believe to be a scientific account, is it's giving the exact specifications of these things happened in this molecular, biological. Again, Pat's more of a science expert than I am, but that's how I would understand a scientific account would be. These things in nature were happening this way to cause this outcome. Whereas I think Genesis is just outlining, this is what happened. We're not going to get into how things were made and formed because nobody cares. That doesn't apply to people's lives. It's not practical. Even if they were to know the answers, like assuming they did know the answers of how the quote-unquote science was happening. I think, yeah, I want to get Pat's thoughts on this, though, before I go too much farther.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to, for sure. But believe it or not, it's probable Genesis was not the first written document anyway, nor is it the first creation story. The Enuma Elish probably is the Mesopotamian story, which we've talked about.
Which is actually, it's referenced in 12 Rules.
Yeah.
So, quick plug, if you want to go check out our book club discussion, you can find more on this.
And even the Bible Project, they talk about it a lot too. You know, they talk about Genesis being actually a response to the Enuma Elish, because it picks up kind of where the Enuma Elish ends in a way, as far as I remember. In other words, the Enuma Elish is, you have multiple entities, divine entities probably, and they are not as powerful as God, as the Hebrew God. And Genesis is kind of writing, well, our God, you know, took the formless and void earth and made this beautiful creation. Your gods couldn't handle it, and they kind of ruined it and made this place formless and void. And then our God took with it and made something beautiful. So there's no true account nor way anyone could know what creation is like. But a separate thought that I always have with this when I think of this is, it's foolish for the Christian or believer to limit God in terms of time and his ability to do things. The universe very well could be 13.7 billion years old or whatever they say. It could be older, it could be less. No one knows. So the age of the universe or the age of the earth, thankfully, doesn't interfere with Jesus's mission to come reunite heaven and earth. Yeah.
And that's important. We don't want to lose sight of what's important.
So many people lose sight on this, though. That's the problem. But that's because so many people don't know what the author of Genesis is trying to do. And people are just so fixed in their ways. Thankfully, I feel like I do a decent job. I think we all do a decent job actually at balancing the two. We recognize that one group views this, another views this, and another views this. And we can keep all three ideas in our head at one time. We, of course, believe one idea more than the other. It's just important to remember when considering these things that God is not limited by anything. We do not know the actual structure of creation, and Genesis is not a modern scientific account. I think it's actually a scientific account, but from the perspective of the first people, per se.
I see. That's a good distinction. Because I would have said Genesis is more of a poetic account.
And it is that too.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to keep referencing Peterson and the book that we're going through, but there's an aspect and an element of speech that I think is very important in that account of God speaking and these things happening, like the importance of speech and acting in the world. I think that's important. And I'm not saying it didn't happen that way either, because I think God speaking enables these scientific processes or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think those ideas necessarily contradict each other. I think you can have God speaking and then the scientific processes as we understand them being formed.
It's hilarious. One of my favorite people to listen to, his name is Frank Turek. Have you guys heard of him?
I have not.
Frank Turek, he's great. YouTube him. He's been in tons of debates with all these atheists. He is awesome. I love this guy. I think I feel the same way he does, and he probably helped influence my thoughts on things, but he's a very strong believer, great at all this stuff. And he's like, he said, I believe in the Big Bang. I just so also happen to believe that there was a Big Banger. I just think it's so funny how he says that, like, as in God made the Big Bang. Because it's so foolish for, yeah, and I'll say foolish. I'll come at these atheists' throats. I don't even care right now. They're so cringe by believing that there was molecules existing without a creator and that they so happen to be, like, what's his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson, like in the first page of one of his books, he said the universe used to exist smaller than the size of the period on the first sentence. And he has the audacity to believe that, but believe there's no God, or to believe that we're living in a simulation. That's a joke. How small is that pea brain? Oh my gosh.
Well, it just shows that we have to have preferences to the things that we call facts.
Yeah, he's so bought into his own bias, he doesn't even realize
I am
it.
too.
All those people don't believe. You are, but you're also not, because you recognize there's other things, other people have other thoughts and ideas.
And Neil, we would love to have you on the podcast at any time if you're listening.
After what you just said, for sure. Oh
man, I feel no remorse for those people.
I got some thoughts here, Patrick. Okay, so Enuma Elish, is that how you say it, Enuma Elish?
I think so, yeah.
So whenever I hear people talk about the Enuma Elish, they say, there's this creation story older than the Genesis story, and they say it to invalidate Genesis, to say, this is older, that means it's more true. But that's not what you're saying.
Not at all. Yeah.
You're saying, if we believe Genesis happened the way it said it happened, then this thing happened, but then some other people wrote a different creation story, and then Moses or somebody else wrote Genesis as a response to that.
If it was Moses, yeah.
Whoever wrote Genesis.
So I want to chime in here too, because we're emphasizing the word wrote or writ. What about creation stories existing by word of mouth? We'd have no way of knowing who had the first one.
True.
if they happened to write theirs down and then other cultures saw the value in that, they probably would have replicated that process of writing their text down or storing them or what have you. So I think it's even difficult to know who had the first story. Were they the first ones to record their story? Probably. And there is someone out there with a PhD that's probably infuriated right now because they do know the answer.
Guaranteed, yeah.
How do you know who had the first? We just know the first written account. We don't know the first creation story.
True.
I think the Jews did a good job of recording their faith over time, their belief in God, that relationship over time. They did a really good job of keeping good records, and especially given that age of time, that point of time, for these records to have survived the way that they did. Obviously, they get translated and interpreted and everything like that, but regardless, they've survived through time and they're still relevant today. I mean, we're talking about it on a podcast in the year 2023. So clearly these documents that are thousands of years old were important enough to preserve. And so I think it's worth recognizing that, okay, maybe we don't know the first creation story because verbally there probably would have been one long before one was written down. We do know the first recorded one, and thank God they recorded them.
Right.
Like, I think that's something we can acknowledge.
Yeah. Could I make another comment on Logan used the word modern scientific account, and you were talking about how just because we believe that God created the world doesn't mean that we disagree with what science has found out about biology and animals and molecular biology. And
yes.
Yeah, just because you believe in Jesus doesn't mean you disbelieve all of science.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of have a philosophical thought on that. So I have a bone to pick with science. And when you throw out the telos of the world, and I'll explain that. Telos is like, do you believe that this world has a purpose? So lots of scientists have thrown that out. And I'm cutting some corners here when I say this, but they don't believe that the world has a purpose. So now they're hyper obsessing over the processes of this world. Now they're microscoping into all the atoms of the atoms, and they're figuring out how things work out. Because they don't know if there's a purpose, then they obsess with the process. So now they've obsessed with the process so much, they believe that this process is all there is, and then they call it evolution. And then someone asks, how did this process start? They say, oh, by chance. So they're just obsessing over the process so much, I think, because they don't know what to do with this telos that they've thrown out, this end purpose, this if there's a purpose for life. But they do find some security in learning about how things work and learning about the processes of the beautiful creation that our Creator has created.
I think scientists are more likely to talk about, to Pat's point, simulation theory or aliens as the answer to the telos, Austin, to your point, before they would acknowledge a creator or a spiritual being.
A lot of it's groupthink too. If there's a high-minded, well-known scientist who's published a lot, and then he happens to say something that there could be a creator, he'll be ostracized at the drop of a hat, and all his work will go out the window. So, I mean,
oh wow,
they know they can't do that just because of how far gone people are. But
well, it's because this thing works by obsessing over the process. That's how they think, and they feel so threatened by considering a telos, by considering a purpose.
But also, on the other hand, thankfully for us, there are plenty of other people who are in between, and they are fascinated by molecular biology and other sciences, and they are believers, because that's how a lot of medicine actually came about.
There's a way for that to be God honoring. I'm not trying to say science is anti-God, because it's not. Because you can do it in a way that's like, oh my goodness, I get to discover more about the design, more about the beauty of what God has done.
Exactly.
As someone that hasn't studied science but loves it and appreciates it, I think the only intersection that a religion, Christianity is the one we're talking about predominantly, but also this theory of evolution. The really only problem they get into is with the origin
Correct.
of the Earth.
Exactly
there isn't a lot of
correct.
discrepancy once the Earth starts to now. I don't think there's as much discrepancy or as many discrepancies between a religious community and a scientific community, because Austin, you had referenced evolution earlier, but there are microevolutions all the time that we can notice within species, or how they adapt and change over time. What I think the harder sell is a macroevolution, because it's not testable or provable. It's looking at similar bone structures or similar animals in different places and then making predictions or assumptions. And obviously it's based in science, but I think that, again, is a tougher sell to say that this T-Rex is now a chicken. It's like, and I think we should question that. How does that happen? There's some ignorance on my part, because there probably is reasoning there, but that's when I start having problems with, or not problems even, but questions about evolution and also dating the world. I got into this randomly in high school for a little bit. So like a lot of how science dates places and times is through the rock, or sampling the rock, drilling down and sampling. But they're measuring the carbon. It's a specific element called carbon-14, I believe. But the assumption is that it decays at the same rate over time. But we've just started measuring it in a very small window of time. To Austin's point earlier, this is a relatively new belief. Our scientific advancements are profound in the last couple hundred years, but it's also in the expanse of the universe existing and of Earth existing. It's just a small sliver of that total time. So to assume that this carbon's decaying at the same rate, we don't have anything to compare it against. Again, it's kind of a tough sell. Maybe the Earth is only a couple thousand years old, or maybe it's even older than what they're estimating now. We just don't know, because the methods that we use to measure and date these things, they seem reliable, but we don't have anything to compare it against. And we don't know if there are other variables that affect that. So I just wanted to make that, because none of us are quote unquote anti-science, or I think most of us are actually pretty interested in science, but it's a conversation worth having too. I think it's always fun to talk about the origin of the world and the different perspectives and what could have happened. So,
and anyone is a blatant fool if they ever say science is concrete. So that's also something just to remember.
Yeah, they're also not a good scientist if they think.
Yeah, you're a terrible scientist if you claim something.
I enjoy
like
Brett Weinstein.
concrete.
He's an evolutionary
He's
theorist.
dope.
I think he's an atheist.
He's
awesome.
He's humble.
Yeah,
and he
he's
does
great.
try to let
I like him a lot.
the facts lead the conversation. But
yep, I like him a lot.
That's funny. We all individually like him and listen to him, but we've never talked about him, even off the podcast or anything. That's funny.
That is funny. Yeah, my dad really likes him too.
Oh yeah, I like him a lot. He's very reasonable.
My dad goes hard with that stuff too. This is my dad's cup of tea.
Oh, I bet, because that's your dad's background is in science. Yeah, the sciences.
This is his forte right here.
I hope I didn't offend Mr. Dyer if he was listening.
No, I don't think so. Not
Okay.
at all. I don't think so.
That's funny.
But I find beauty in thinking of the things like God created the proton, the neutron, the electron, and the things even smaller than that. And he made them to work. Well, originally he made them to work the way they were intended to. And then, of course, some things unfortunately don't work out the way they're intended to now, but that's because of the fall. And it's just fun and to consider all things in between. The Earth could be over 13 billion years old, could also be 6,000. Who the heck knows? But I'm not going to say one or the other and limit God to that time frame.
Listener, none of this conversation was planned, but I think Pat has ended on a very good point here, in that you should not be basing your beliefs, whether atheist, Christian, other religion, agnostic, it should not probably be based on the origin of the Earth, because at the end of the day, they are theories.
Wow.
Well said.
Wow.
Exactly right.
That's convicting.
Mic drop.
That's a mic drop.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's Shooting the Breeze conversation. Please let us know if you have any suggestions as to books we should read or topics we should discuss by contacting us at beingbecomingpodcast@gmail.com. We hope you join us next week for another conversation.